Welcome back. This is our 12th episode of Coffee with Krav. We created Coffee with Krav to connect with everybody out there and educate and entertain. Hopefully, we'll do that today with Jay. Before we do that, I am going to ask for your help. Um, at Align Wealth, we don't advertise. We don't do anything on social media. All of our clients recently have come to us based on word of mouth, people like yourself. So we want to think about a friend, a neighbor, a colleague, someone retiring, someone changing jobs, someone going through a divorce, someone that needs help. If you think of someone like that, we have a special second opinion service that we can take a look and see what's going on in their lives and see if we can help them. So I do ask for your help, and if you even have someone that just wants to watch more episodes of Coffee with Krav, please feel free to contact us, and we'll get them on the list. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about rock and roll. We're going to talk about touring. We're going to talk about stress, which a lot of us are going through during this time. How we can make changes, change our energy in our life, no matter what our age is, and live a more productive and healthier life. We have Jay Therrien. Jay is a keynote speaker, an executive coach, an author. He's a co-author of The 3 Commitments of Leadership: How Clarity, Stability, and Rhythm Create Great Leaders. Jay has has led learning and development at 3 Fortune 500 companies, where his programs and content continue to serve as core components for leadership, communication, and professional development training used by thousands of employees at those companies today. As a consultant and speaker, Jay has been on stage in front of millions around the world, both in person and via national television broadcasting. And he has, through his collaborations with best-selling authors and leaders, helped many, many people. He enjoys writing music, leads a nonprofit music school in Springfield, Mass. So Jay, you grew up in Manchester, Mass, right? How was it growing up there?
Manchester, Connecticut, actually.
Manchester, Connecticut.
Yeah, which is close to the Mass line. I mean, I'm maybe 30 minutes now from where I grew up, so not too far. I live in Longmeadow, Mass now.
Okay, and how was it growing up in Manchester?
Manchester was fun. It looks a lot different now than it did when I was a little kid. They expanded into malls, and the zoning got a little crazy, so shops popped up everywhere. But it was an old little silk town, turn of the century silk town that got converted into a lot of condos and apartments, and then things there took over. But it was interesting growing up in that section of Connecticut because we were right outside of the insurance filing cabinet of the world, Hartford, Connecticut.
Gotcha.
Foreshadowing into how I ended up where I am today.
Okay, and at what point in time did you realize that you had a thirst for music?
Oh gosh, I was probably 10 or 11 years old. My older cousin, Jamie, shout out to Jamie, was a drummer in a punk rock band. And I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world to watch him play his drums, and, idolized him. He was a handful of years older than me. And then he started introducing me to the Grateful Dead and the Rolling Stones, and then started introducing me to Metallica and, Black Flag and like all these punk bands and metal bands, and really expanding my musical palette, which at the time blew my little mind. And watching him perform, I was like, that's what I want to do. So that's when I started to pick up a guitar and all that fun stuff. And I think I was my 12th Christmas. I was 12 years old, and I got an electric bass guitar and a leather biker jacket. I was like the coolest kid in middle school that year, for sure, at least in my own mind. And that started my whole journey. Yeah.
So let's talk about your touring years. You had a band, Farewell Radiance.
Farewell Radiance was one of them. Yeah. Yep.
So with that one, I did find this.
Oh boy, yeah, we're going in the Wayback Machine here. That's the beauty of the internet. See, most of my musical career took place before the internet was super popular, which I think is a good thing to an extent. But yeah, I was actually in a band called Simple. It was the easiest name ever. Prior to Farewell
Very
Radiance,
simple.
we put out some records, toured, was a ton of fun. Had a lot of fun in that regard, and then Farewell Radiance, of course, was an extension of that for the most part. And you know, there are those days. There's those sometimes where I miss those days of sleeping in a van or a Sprinter, getting up, waking up, not knowing what city you're in, eating some ramen or whatever you could afford while you're on the road, right? And rocking out for a bit. You know, life was a little bit simpler back then.
So you toured with many people from James Taylor to Snoop Dogg. Uh, just
I don't
throwing
think I'm
that.
in that photo, but I've got a few of those around for sure. Yeah, yeah.
I got to believe, the difference between touring with James Taylor and Snoop Dogg. You might still be high from from touring
There's
with Snoop Dogg.
Listen, if anybody watching is wondering if contact high is a myth, it is not. The reality is when I was in bands and growing up in Connecticut, I was fortunate to connect with some local promoters and local production managers. And when I wasn't on the road with my own band, I was touring with other bands. So you start out much like any industry, what they call as a runner. So it's basically, hey kid, run and pick up, Snoop at the airport, run and pick up this person here, there, and whatever. Go get 37 bags of M&Ms, filter out nothing but green and put them in the dressing room before 4 o'clock or the show's not going to happen, right? Like you get all those horrible jobs nobody else wants to do. And then you win the trust and you start to build up a reputation and ethos and you move kind of up the ladder. And I was fortunate to connect with some really good folks that ran a lot of the tours in the tri-state and New England area. And then that got me onto more of a national scale. So, going from working with James Taylor, who was unbelievable, you'd roll in and have a little bit of wine set up. I mean, it's just him and a guitar, him and about 30 guitars, but him and the one or two guitars he would actually play for a couple of nights. And then you get the next tour assignment and you're on the road with Snoop Dogg and the Fugees. And you're like, and George Clinton and the Parliament of Funkadelic. And you're like, well, this is going to be a complete 180. So it was always interesting. It was fun. And I made some connections and some friends in that industry that to this day are still great for me. I have to remind my children that sometimes when we go to concerts, remember when we could go to concerts? That was a great time in our lives. Can't wait to get back there. But I have to remind our children sometimes, like, nah, we don't always get to like stand over here and watch from the side of the stage. It's just because, so that's those perks still every now and then pop up in my life, which is fun. But yeah, it was quite a time.
I wore a shirt just for you. So we're talking about rock and roll. So this is rocking chairs. So you got Mick Jagger and you got John Lennon and a few of the other rockers. So rocking chairs.
I love it. That's amazing. Yeah, that's that was a fun time in my life for sure. Absolutely.
What was your favorite band that you toured with? And anything that you can, just one story, and then we'll get on to some other stuff.
Yeah. Oh man, picking a favorite is like picking a favorite child. It's not. I think I can go back to the ones I didn't enjoy, which I won't share on a recorded cast because you never know who could see these, and I don't need the I don't need the flashback. But
it's just between us. It's just
it's true. It's just between us, just us girls talking. Billy Joel was a lot of fun to work with, and I'll tell you why. So this is a fun story. So you have what they have a call sheet. So let's say if I take a step back for a second. So if we're on the crew and there's 40 or 50 people traveling with us in various roles, right? Production and wardrobe and light L&D, light design and whatever, right? And then we show up and there could be 50 or 100 local representatives from typically a union that are putting the stage together and really helping us bring it to life. So you have a call sheet. It's like, okay, you show up at 10, unload the trucks, blah, 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 blah. The show happens. You get the run of show, everything from pre-show throughout. And then there's always a callback at the end. And the callback at the end of this one in particular tour with Billy Joel was really, really early in the morning / late at night. And people are always annoyed. They're like, why do we have to come back at blah, blah, blah. And so we'd do this kind of post-show huddle and we'd have the whole crew around. And Billy would come down with a towel around his neck and there was cases of Dewar's who were off to the side, and he would walk over and grab a bottle, and he'd come up and he'd say, "Hey, Krav, what's your name?" "Oh, Mark. Hey, thanks so much for your help, Mark. Oh, where are you from? You're local, blah, 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 blah," and autograph the bottle, personalize it, hand it to you, walk on to the next person. That was the end of the night. That was the callback.
It's very cool.
So I can tell you from being on a ton of those tours, that's a rarity. That doesn't happen all the time.
He's very cool.
So when you're with a production like that, with artists that really want to make the connection with the folks who are making them look good, that's always a win. So Billy Joel was great with that. James Taylor was awesome with that. Snoop was great. You brought up the picture of Snoop. Everybody talks about he just smokes a ton of weed and whatnot, and it's true. But I've got some fun stories about reconnecting with him afterwards as well. And maybe that's a future episode of Coffee with Krav. We could go down a rabbit hole there for sure.
The rabbit hole's open. It's open now. You can.
We might fall back into it. Yeah, exactly.
So how was your leadership developed during the tour? Because you probably had to use a lot of leadership there.
Yeah, it was interesting. I'll never forget the first tour I went on. I was getting ready to leave, and I was based outside in Hartford at a local amphitheater, which has changed names 17 times. It used to be the Meadows Music Theater in Hartford. I think it's the Xfinity Center now. I think everything across the country is the Xfinity Center. I remember, getting the production layout and everything, and they said, "Okay, when you roll in, you got to teach everybody what to do." And I was like, "Teach what? I have to do what? I have to I can tell people what to do. But I have to teach." I was like, this is not a skill set I naturally possess. And fortunately for me, it was. I just didn't realize it. So I started going back and studying adult learning methodologies. Like, what is the ADDIE model? How do you design these things? How does the brain work? How do you make better connections? And went down that path pretty hardcore. And through that started testing leadership models. I mean, you could look at the Enneagram, you could look at like Wooden's pyramid of success. I mean, there's a million different things out there. And as the more I learned about continuous learning and leadership development and human capital development and cognitive recognition, the more I started to challenge some of those conventional models and say, okay, in times of stress, we can't remember 9 things. You can't remember where you are in this pyramid. You can't remember this style with this wing and this, like, when the world's on fire around you, what do you have to pay attention to the most? So I always just tried to distill it down to the simplest, easiest way to execute possible. And that really started my framework, both from a leadership and learning, and also just leadership in terms of people. Because at the end of the day, the thing that I wanted to make sure happened more than the show going on was that no one got hurt, that everybody knew what their role was, that everybody had a good, I wouldn't say a good time, because when you're pushing thousands of pounds a year, nobody really enjoys that. But you're part of something amazing. Like, to be able to sit back and watch, I use Billy Joel as an example, Billy play for 2.5, 3 hours after you just busted your tail that day, and have a celebratory cocktail and enjoy it was something I was trying to foster in terms of the culture and environment. So that was the start of it all. Yeah.
I guess at some point you had to come off the road and start work. Yeah, and then you started working in the financial industry. Why'd you leave the rockstar life and go to Wall Street?
It was a great question. I realized I hadn't seen my family in a long time. Cell phones were yay big, and we had a proton pack from Ghostbusters on our backs to I woke up on a bus in Arizona, and I was the lead on that bus, and it was like, miles to home was kind of the joke of that tour. And I looked down, and it was like over 3,000 miles to home. And it hit me that day. I'm like, what am I going to do after this? I can't do this for the rest of my life. I'm watching folks with horrible backs and hips and whatever, and the insurance wasn't great, and you're making good money, but you can only make good money if you work. So it started to all come to hit in my head, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I'm working 168 hours a week, and if you do the math, you're always on. There's no downtime, right? So when I came back home, I went to my boss and our promoter and said, I love being a part of this, but I need to transition out into something different. And at the time, we were merging with SFX is merging with Clear Channel, which is now Comcast and NBC, huge conglomerate there. And folks were vying for my job. The gentleman from Red Rocks out in Colorado wanted to come out to Connecticut and whatever. And I was like, you know what? Let them have it. I'm done. I got to get out of here. So I stayed on and transitioned my way out, but I realized that going into management there wasn't an option because we were consolidating and already top heavy. And again, like I foreshadowed in the intro, growing up in Manchester, I saw all these logos of all these big companies around, and I'm like, well, I can sell anything to anybody. I got the gift of gab. I've got a learning and development background. Let me try to figure out if I can work into one of these companies. And I want you to picture, and I know it's hard because I used it all up, but long hair, earrings, tattoos, right? Like I have to say this out loud. I'm not sure I would have hired me back then, right? So like going on all these interviews and conducting myself and presenting myself and finally get the opportunity at the Hartford and ran with it. And 22, 23 years later, here I am, which is pretty awesome. But I realized that I needed something more stable, something that would allow me to be a member of a community, a member of a family, start a family myself. That was a big goal for me. And I wasn't going to be able to do that if I stayed on the road all year long.
Now, you've helped coach many executives out there. What are some of the lessons that that we can all learn from that?
You know, so I think and you mentioned the book, you know, from a leadership perspective, I break it down to three very simple terms: clarity, stability, and rhythm. And I don't care if you're a leader at work. I don't care if you're a leader in your community, if you're a parent, a grandparent, a husband, a wife, doesn't matter, right? At some point throughout your day, you have to lead and you have to help others and you have to motivate others. That's really what I believe we're all here for. So I focus a lot of work there. Like, how clear is the goal? How clear is the role? Like, is there clarity in what we are doing, what we're trying to accomplish? And I think back to the business you're running. You know, you're very clear with where you want to be, where you and your partner and the rest of your team need to do, how you all align to that, et cetera. Then the stability part that most folks don't focus on. How do we provide a safe, stable environment that is predictable, that is equal parts predictable and proactive, right? That allows us to spread our wings a little bit, to try things, to see what works, what doesn't work in that safe environment before we, you know, bring that out in front of clients or prospects or other folks. And then the rhythm, which, by the way, most organizations don't even focus on the clarity stuff, let alone getting into this stable environment. They think it's predictable because they say, I have an open door policy, which, by the way, my door's always closed and I'm never in the office. Then it gets to that rhythm. So if you've got those first two things, now how do you produce a cadence of working together that's natural? And I think you and I, in our prep for this, we talked a little bit about, you know, I do a lot of double centuries for cancer research and those sorts of things. So I like to ride bikes a lot. And, you know, if I'm riding on a flat road at 20 miles per hour, it's not a ton of effort, right? But the minute I hit my first hill, what do I have to do? Well, I got to gear down and keep up that revolutions per minute. And I'm going to go a little bit slower. And I know I'm going to go slower, but I got to keep the right momentum. Otherwise, I'm going to fall over or start to roll backwards. Most organizations don't pay attention to creating that rhythm and fostering that environment where folks really do collaborate. And there's a lot there, which is why. It's why I remain gainfully employed as a coach. And it's a lot of the reason why most of these executives and companies and firms don't pay attention to it, because you're talking about energy management, you're talking about leadership, you're talking about proactive client service, practice management. There's a number of things that go into that. And there are very few companies that get that part of it right.
Well, let's, I talked about it earlier about stress. You know, a lot of people out there are very stressed out with everything that's going on in the world, especially the COVID-19. We have an election coming up. There's many people just sitting home in their house. That's the whole reason we started Coffee with Krav. What's your definition of stress?
My definition of stress is a real or perceived lack of control. That's it. So if you're in a situation where you don't have control over something, and fear of flying is often an example I give. My mother, God rest her soul, was deathly afraid of flying. I remember the first time I got on a plane with her when I was about 13 or 14 years old. I think I still have claw marks from her nails in my left forearm. She was just afraid. And why was she afraid? Because if we hit turbulence, she had absolutely no control, right? I could grab the seats, I could start the Hail Marys, and I could pray that we were going to make it through that. And it's like that with everything in our lives. You think about those things of which, how we're spending that energy, of things that we have total control over, and that's proactive, positive energy. And then there's a lot of folks that get stressed out because they're focused on either a real or a perceived lack of control, and they're focusing a ton of energy in that area where it's more around influence or things that that ultimately, again, they have no complete control over. So that stress really is that, in my opinion, the real or perceived lack of control over a situation.
Yeah, interesting about the about airplanes. My wife used to be very stressed out, and she used to hate flying. And anytime we had turbulence, she'd talk about the claws. She'd take those claws, and then she would claw me. And interestingly enough, after 9/11, she had no
Mm,
stress after that. I
mm.
guess there was a lot more. There's a lot more of the people, looking at the bags and making sure that there was nothing on there, and there was a lot
There's
of
a lot more security and checkpoints.
security.
The other interesting mental phenomena that happens, without going too nerdy with it, is that when we see the worst case, because our brains are amazing. There's this tiny little neurological center called the amygdala, which is the fight or flight mechanism, right? So it's what kept our ancestors from becoming something's lunch thousands of years ago. Now is, telling me danger, there's a pterodactyl. Now, there are no actual pterodactyls, although it's 2020, so nothing would surprise me. Maybe that's like maybe dinosaurs reemerging is like the September or October 2020 on the bingo card. I'm not sure. Let's hope not. But that little stress sensor is firing the alarm, as we like to call it, is firing, saying danger, there's a problem. Because we're projecting out 15 different ways this could play, right? We hit turbulence. What's the worst could happen? A wing could rip off the plane. Well, the plane's actually designed for the wings to go like this and snap back. Or, like, most people don't know that, but these things can withstand a ridiculous beating. As long as you don't hit a mountain or lose gravity, you should be okay. But we're projecting through what are all the terrible things that could happen. Sometimes when you see things, and by the way, one life lost is one too many, right? 9/11 is a horrible tragedy. But there could have been a psychological thing too, where your wife saw what happened and said, that's my worst fear. Somebody hijacks a plane and the plane goes down. It happened. Your brain goes, it's reality. Okay, we now know how to deal with it. How do we deal with it? There's additional security checkpoints. There's dog sniffing bags. There's blah, 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 right? There's now risk mitigation in play that can shut down some of that alarm because the brain has seen it happen and actually play out. Until it happens, there's the what if, right? So there's a little bit of a psychological phenomenon there too.
Yeah, and you talk about the fight or flight. That happens in investing all the time, and I try to teach it. I try to talk about it because when markets go down, take March as an example. First thing we want to do is, all right, what are we going to do? We got to sell. We got to do something. In many cases, standing still is the best thing to do. So if you're in Manhattan and it's 2:00 in the morning and someone jumps out at you, either going to punch them or you're going to run. But standing there doing nothing doesn't make any sense. So it's that whole fight or flight. But in a lot of cases, especially investing, remaining calm is the right thing to do.
Well, and along those same lines, the question, if I'm a listener, a watcher, peruser, if I happen to see this later, when this happens, the question I always ask, which is one of the bedrocks of behavioral economics, is, has this ever happened before? And if so, what was the outcome? So it gives someone like you, who's a professional at this, who knows the history, who's seen these happen before, right? And that's the whole financial planning. You run holistic financial, planning and wealth management. So you could say, okay, Jay, I know you're panicked. Let's talk about what's happening. Has this happened before? Yes. Here was the average time to recover. Any challenges for you and Elizabeth and the kids? No. Anything on the horizon we need to worry about? No. Okay, great. Then we're on plan. You're on trajectory, right? Like, volatility doesn't equal loss unless we sell. There's all but we psychologically just focus on loss aversion. We're so afraid of losing money that we keep ourselves as human beings from actually gaining money or staying the course. And that's a really big challenge. But, and then there's also those folks, we talk about the fight or flight. There's also the potential of over exertion and greed, right? Of like, hey, market's down, let's sell everything. and let's buy at a massive discount. I'm going to pull the kids out of school and put them out to work, and we're going to take their income and we're going to just fight. And you're like, whoa, 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 Che, calm down, buddy. Like, we got what we need. We do see it as valuable, right? So there's you have a very difficult job at, managing those relationships. But from our conversations, I know you and your team do a great job there. But it's just how we're wired as human beings. I remind my wife all the time, honey, we're wired to make stupid decisions. So when I forget stuff, it's not because I don't love you. It's because I'm wired that way.
I might have to use that wiring.
Doesn't always work out for me, but
I'm gonna try that. I'll tell you how it goes. Let's go into the components. You mentioned energy before. Let's go into the components of energy that drive and expand our capacity. What are those components?
So we look at energy in 4 realms. And if you're watching this or listening to this and you have a pen and a piece of paper, I always ask folks to kind of draw this out because it helps you. I believe as human beings, we process these concepts visually. If you take your non-dominant hand, so if you're right-handed, put your left hand down on a piece of paper, get out a pen and draw a little pyramid around the outside, the shape of your hand. I find that the shape of your hand is usually about good enough for you to take notes inside of. And in doing so, because I'll never ask you to do something I wouldn't do myself, you end up, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but you end up with something on a piece of paper that looks like this horrible candy corn looking thing. For me anyway, and you're right, I want you to write at the base of that pyramid, physical, because I believe everything from an energy management perspective we do throughout the day relies on that physical foundation. So what do we do for ourselves to keep our physical energy at a high? And this is the easiest thing for us to do, yet the hardest for most human beings to act on, because you get inundated with things. Your calendar blows up. You've got this awesome coffee with Krav with this handsome gentleman, host, and then you're so fired up about the conversation that Mark and I are having that you want to run through a wall, and you're all pumped up, and then your phone rings, and then this happens, and then the kids are asking for your help, and before you know it, it's midnight and you didn't work out and you just ate what was laying around and those sorts of things, right? So we are our own worst enemies in this regard sometimes. So when we think about physical energy, there's a couple of quick things I always give for quick hits here. None of this is going to sound revolutionary or new for all of you folks, but as somebody who had to take this journey again, just in full and fair disclosure, when I was touring and as a musician and, coming out of college, playing football and baseball and all that sort of stuff, I was in good shape, great shape. And over the years found myself ballooning up over 330 pounds, just completely out of touch, doing all these crazy things, drinking and eating on expense accounts, you name it. And had to take a hard look in the mirror and say, what the heck am I doing? I'm killing myself. So I stand before you now over 100 pounds down from that point where I was, and a guy who, as Krav and I talked in the intro, I got up and hit weights this morning because I knew my day was crazy. I prioritize these things and have moved into the habitual way of doing it. So when you think about physical energy, a couple of quick hits here. I use the analogy of our bodies are these high performing machines. So think of, a luxury car or a sports car, right? What are the ways you keep that car moving on a weekly basis? You got to rev the engine 4 to 5 times a week. What I mean by that is get out, do some cardio, 30 minutes of cardio, physical activity. You don't have to do the crazy strength training that I did this morning and wanted to throw up in my garage gym because it was already stupid hot and humid out there. But you got to get that engine revved up. And then along those same lines, 2 to 3 times a week, you want to reinforce the chassis of that vehicle as well. That's where strength and conditioning comes in. Again, you don't have to be lifting crazy amounts of weights. You can do pliability, banded exercises, stretching, yoga, awesome things to keep that frame solid, right? So you've got your heart and your engine revved up and fired up and clear. You've got that frame reinforced. And then the most important thing, one of the most important things is obviously to focus on the nutrition, the lean proteins, making sure that there's my youngest daughter, again, just in open conversation, recently diagnosed type 1 diabetic. So we are really paying attention to carbohydrates in our household, even more than I was trying to count my macros, right? Because we're trying to make sure that she doesn't consume more than her body can process. And that really has put the nutritional focus in the Therrien household for sure and solidified that this year. And one of the biggest things in terms of physical energy, which most folks discount, is sleep. And 7 to 8 hours of sleep a day is really the target. I mean, 6 at minimum, I'll take it, but 7 to 8 is what you should be striving for. Because even something like a light sleep, everybody thinks you need this deep REM sleep. Really, the light sleep is how our muscles and our body recovers. You know, we have micro tears throughout the day. Every time we move our bodies, our muscles and our tendons and things are moving and tearing and building and all kinds of great stuff, right? And that needs time to heal, needs time to recover. Our brain needs time to shut down. My mouth needs time to stop moving, which is really difficult for me throughout the day. So that sleep is critically important to our ability to recharge our batteries in the physical realm.
I just want to remind everybody that if you do have a question for Jay, just email me at mkravitz, Kravitz is spelled Kravietz, mkravitz at alignwealth.com. Align is ALINE. So mkravitz at alignwealth.com. If you have a question for Jay, please email me. I got my Outlook up over here. Okay, so we talked about physiological. That's the foundation to make us healthy. What's the next one?
So then we move up the pyramid. You know, hopefully, maybe you took a couple of notes if you are drawing this out, and you draw a line above that, and then you put in the word mental. So we're now looking at mental energy. So we started with physical. We can keep our bodies upright. Now we have to keep the brain sharp, and we have to be able to keep it clear because we are required to make a ton of decisions and focus throughout the day, regardless of your role. Again, in a family or a business system, you're required to make decisions and have that mental acuity throughout the day. You know, so a couple of quick things here. Number one, multitasking. Stop multitasking. It is physically impossible. With a caveat, you can do one mental and one physical at the same time. What I mean by that is when I was working out this morning, I put on a podcast of something I wanted to learn about, I wanted to listen to. So my brain was absorbing that while I was working out. It's about as much multitasking as I believe as human beings we can do. If you've got two things open and something else open on your phone and you're trying to pay attention to what's going on, congratulations, you're paying 20 to 25% of attention to those four things and you're missing all of it, right? So multitasking just overloads our senses and really makes us feel exhausted. Attacking problems and looking at root causes and symptoms of problems. Now, again, we're in a pandemic. We're in the midst of a global pandemic. The world doesn't look anything like it did in February. Heck, the world doesn't look anything like it did last November, but the United States doesn't look anything like it did in February. And this is very situational. And we have fallen into this habit as human beings to address things situationally. So if this is a problem right now, let me just take care of this and it'll eventually go away. And the reality is it doesn't. So take a step back and look at root cause, attacking those root causes, looking at things philosophically in terms of how they are implemented throughout your day, your week, your life, if you will, your business, if you're a business owner. So the strategic mindset is great, but also think about that philosophical alignment of why you do what you do and why it's important to those you work with, and start to attack those things that are getting in the way of doing that. The other big thing from a mental focus perspective, recent neuroscience shows it takes about 7 or 8 minutes to reset your brain. And what I mean by that is if you're in panic and really starting to get stressed and worried and anxious, if you can disconnect yourself from that situation for 7 or 8 minutes and focus on something you care about, it's enough for you to take that deep breath, to have that reset, that alarm shuts down and says, okay, I'm ready to get back at it, right? So for me, that's music. I have a handful of songs that I know that are on my phone. If I'm starting to really feel stressed out and I need to disconnect, I pop in my AirPods, I play one of those tunes, I listen to all the layers of that music, that resets me, gets me focused on something I care about. I can shut that down, I can refocus. For some folks, it's as simple as getting up and oscillating, going, taking a walk, leaving the room, leaving the situation. I'm not a trained therapist by any stretch of the means, but those are some great risk mitigation strategies for that mental physical break. And quite honestly, I would argue that you should be taking one of those breaks at least once an hour, if not once every 90 minutes. So think about that, blocking that into your calendar. Don't schedule an hour for that meeting when you know you only need 38 minutes. Schedule it for 50 minutes and spend the last 10 recharging before you take on the next task. it sounds very simple, but it's very difficult to put into practice for most.
I have to believe that that's a great great thing to incorporate. And for a long time, I would just sit at my desk or I'd be working, and I wouldn't look up, and I would just sit there and do my work, and then all of a sudden hours passed. And I've tried to incorporate what you're saying, is take that little mental break, even go to another office when I was in the office, or just walk somewhere. Yeah, I do believe you need that mental break. Just quick question: you mentioned the podcast. Just wondering, what's your favorite podcast?
Man, there's quite a bit of them. Stuff You Should Know is a favorite one of mine, because it's always just literally random. I mean, some of the topics that come out of there are just insane. Alec Baldwin's podcast is really funny. I just think he's a funny actor, and he has a really funny delivery method. I do listen to Joe Rogan, who I know he's like the #1 podcast on the planet. I don't have the patience for 3.5 hours worth of crazy space talk, and God only knows what other substances they're discussing. But when he has an interesting guest on, I definitely will do that. Jocko Willenick has a really good podcast too. It's all about behavioral hacks and the behavioral mindset and discipline. So there's a number of them that I'll listen to.
Did you read his book, Extreme Ownership?
I did. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. There's so much great. That's the thing, is podcasting. I have a whole podcasting setup here in my recording studio, because I think I have fun stuff to say. But that's the beauty of it, right? Anybody with a microphone and a couple of words that they think matter can record it and put stuff out now. So fortunately, there's a lot of really good content out there, and unfortunately, there's been a few where I'm like, let's not subscribe to this. My wife is big into the story podcast too. Like, we got into Serial back in the day when that was like NPR was promoting that, and a bunch of those. So sometimes I'll do that as well.
Yeah, I find people that either love podcasts or never listen to podcasts. I do think that it's growing as a medium. So I think it's an important medium. And just let you know, I do have a podcast. You can maybe say I'm one of those guys that has a recording and just does it. But mine's called Find Your Exit. So it's
on my podcast app right now.
Okay, good.
We'll do that afterwards. So it's slightly unprofessional for me to do it now.
Okay, no problem. Find your exits. Okay, so that was number 2. Number 2 was mental. What is number 3?
Number 3, moving up that pyramid, is emotional. So emotional energy. And a lot of folks confuse mental and emotional because they think, oh, it's all driven by the brain, mental versus, well, the difference is with mental, I'm focusing on tasks and how I'm approaching problems and how I'm getting things done. With the emotional, of course, that's really the most correlated to stress, because it's how I'm feeling and making those deeper connections. And as somebody who focuses a lot on the human behavioral component of it, this is a really big one for me, because I have struggled in my adult life with anxiety and stress, as have, I think the recent statistics are 75% of all medical visits are anxiety related. Think about that.
Amazing.
I mean,
yeah.
4 people in a waiting room, 3 of them are there because they think they have a heart condition or they're worried about something else, and it's really just stress and anxiety. So anyway, my point in that is that there is a vast difference there. So a couple of quick things there. It's all about making those connections. So first and foremost, we do what I like to call a toxic information blackout, because 24/7 news cycle, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's 6 screens in my immediate view here right now. And if I had the news on, or if I was paying attention to the notifications and the flashing lights and all the news stories and the pandemic and what's happening in the world and should I be eating sugar and blah, 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 right? All that becomes information overload. My brain is just firing on all cylinders and just panicked and worried, much like you mentioned your wife about the flying, right? Like, just all those things just lead into that fear, and it drives me insane. So how do we block that out? Pick 1 or 2 trusted sources. And this is great in the pandemic. Most folks are still worried about COVID-19, as they should be. It's real, right? Pick 1 or 2 trusted sources, check them once or twice a day, and be done with it, right? Like, know that the information you're getting is as accurate as it possibly can be. Consume it once or twice, let your brain process it, because there is a need to process those things, and then move on, and then focus more on things like making those connections. So it sounds silly, but, you know, I have three beautiful daughters here at home, ages 8, 12, and 15, right? Going to soon to be 16 and getting her license, and God, I'm in for it, right? But I love spending time with my kids. I make it a point to, this sounds funny, but I have to do it. I schedule time throughout my day to go up and talk to my kids and hang out with my kids for 20 minutes or a half hour, at least once or twice during my day. Otherwise, I stand in front of the screen, this hour excluded, but I sit in front of my screen just doing the same thing over and over again, right? And making that connection. Also infusing humor. We are funny creatures. And even if we don't find ourselves funny, others find us funny, and we all like to laugh. So when you get around the dinner table, if you have, you know, if you're with someone for dinner, if you have a family like I do with little kids around, instead of saying, "Oh, how was your day?" The thing I say to my kids, I say, "What was the first thing you laughed at today? What was the funniest video you saw on the internet today? Show me," right? And we laugh and we have fun with it. I personally, before I go to bed every night, I've been revisiting The Office and Parks and Recreation and a number of these comedy series, even Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, which is what I thought originally this was. So I was a little upset when it wasn't Jerry Seinfeld, but you're
Well,
but no, in all seriousness, what I do at the end of my day is I finish my day by watching or consuming something funny, because I find that when I wake up the next morning after having done that for a couple of months, the first thing I think of is what the last thing I saw at the end of the night before. So I think of something funny. I think of the funny skit or the funny episode of whatever it was. So that's been a way for me to start my day in a more fun, humorous type of way. So there's a number of things you can do, but again, blocking out all the craziness and the information, right? Consume, you have ultimate control over what you put in your brain and what you choose to do with it, right? We talked about stress being a lack of control. You don't have control over the markets. You don't have control over traffic or weather or, you know, any flight delays when we can get on planes, those sorts of things. What you do have control over is what you put in your brain and how you choose to act on it. And that's what I'm getting at here. So choose to be funny, choose to make those deeper connections with folks. Choose what gets through that gatekeeper and into your brain, because that's going to help control that stress and ultimately keep that emotional energy high.
and as you were saying, it's important whatever you do in the last thing that you do before you go to sleep, right? A lot of people grab their phone and they're on whatever, Facebook and all that other garbage.
Instagram or yeah, all that stuff. Yeah. And that's actually, so these are, I actually ended up getting new glasses that have blue light blocking in them. Because I noticed I was staring at screens all day long and I'm starting to get headaches. And I can tell you, supposedly the science checks out. For me, at least anecdotally, it's working. So if you are one of those folks where you get on an iPad or your phone and you're kind of scrolling through, or now if you're watching a television, you're far enough away from it to where supposedly the light doesn't, you know, stimulate the neurons in your brain too much, unless you're like right on it, and in which case we'll have a different conversation. But if you're using a mobile device or something that actually uses blue light technology, even invest in the 10 or 15 bucks on Amazon to buy a pair of blue light blockers can help, because when you're staring at those screens for so long, it's keeping your brain waves firing and it's harder to shut down and to go to sleep. And we wonder why we have insomnia issues when we just stare at these devices all day long.
Interesting.
I'm not anti-gadget, by the way. It probably sounds like I am. I'm one of the biggest tech nerds around, but there's definitely a time and a place for shutting that down and helping ourselves recover.
So you're a tech nerd. What's your favorite new product that you've bought or want to buy?
Favorite new product. So I bought a Rode. We're talking about podcasting. I bought a Rode casting board, which the not for podcasting, but for doing virtual music production with some musician friends of mine around the world. It has 0 latency. So it means there's no lag. So I could be jamming live with a buddy of mine in California, and over even Zoom or things of that, you know, technology like what we're using, there's a little bit of a delay. And when you're talking, not that big of a deal, because you see my mouth, you see my lips and my mouth move, and then you hear the words slightly after that. When you're trying to actually jam with somebody and there's that latency, you're like, I can't hear the change and they're playing the wrong key. So to get something like that has 0 latency where you can collaborate in real time has been awesome. It has really been a sanity check for me. Think about, and again, emotional energy. with how invested I am in music and that being such a big part of who I am as a human being, that's important to me. So that technology makes that possible. And that's probably been one of my favorite purchases for sure.
That's very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. So let's go to the top of the pyramid. What's at the very top?
So the tip is spiritual. And a lot of times when I talk about this or have done interviews or have recently delivered this, a lot of folks confuse spirituality and religion. And for some folks, their religion is ultimately their purpose, right? And that's where they drive these from. But when I think about, when I talk about spirituality, I want you to think about your mission, your vision, the purpose for what you do. And really it's the why. And you talk about Seinfeld stole your coffee idea. Simon Sinek had the power of why. We wrote about it, about 5 or 6 years prior to that in the 3 commitments. And, but it's not a new concept, but people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Right. And you have to understand that why and that real purpose. So for me, that's being a musician and giving that music into communities that don't have access to it. That's why I help run a nonprofit music school here in Massachusetts. Really you need to understand what that purpose is. And that's a much deeper conversation, obviously, for most folks. And I would imagine in your conversations with your clients, you have a lot of that, like, hey, what have you accomplished? What do you still have left to accomplish? Let's talk about the financial plan and what that's meant to be, from a monetary perspective, but it's more than just the money, right? It's like, what legacy do you want to leave? What impact do you want to have on the world? What do you want to help people do more of? That's what we're talking about in terms of that spiritual energy. When you can connect to that, and align what you do throughout the day towards that greater goal, that keeps that spiritual bucket unbelievably full. I mean, that's your gratitude, your empathy, all of the things on the right side of your brain, all your creativity comes from that energy source. So thinking through some ways that you can keep that up, obviously aligning a purpose is great. Gratitude plays a big role into that. I have a gratitude journal. And the first time one of my colleagues years ago had introduced me to this concept, I kind of passed it off as corny. I was like, he's like, I get up and I write in my gratitude journal every day, somebody I'm thankful for, or I'll write a personalized note to someone that I care about, and I'll send it out, and I'll send the notes out at the end of the week. I'm like, really? And he's like, trust me, do it for a month. And if you hate it. So I did it for a month about 6 years ago, and I still do it every morning. And it doesn't have to be a massive dissertation, right? But like, what am I grateful for? Who am I thankful for, et cetera? That helps my brain, again, focus on what's most important to me and why I do what I do. So that's a really big thing. And being able to pass on some of the knowledge and the experience you have. So mentoring is a huge thing that a lot of folks look to refill that spiritual energy as well. I can imagine most of the folks listening to this have some awesome experiences, whether they be personally or professionally, that they could share with future generations or even their current generation that just don't have that vantage point. So look for opportunities to mentor, to share that knowledge, because we get so proud of all the things we built up in our lives. And a lot of us don't get the opportunity, or as much of an opportunity as we'd like, to be able to share that with the rest of the world. So finding a local way in your community to make those connections, again, really keeps that spiritual bucket clean and full. And a lot of big organizations do this, but they do it like once or twice a year with a give back or a campaign, or they raise money, or they go and create a park somewhere or clean up a park, which is awesome. But I believe as human beings, we got to do this at least on a weekly basis. And if you really want to keep that energy level up, and you've got that guiding principle and purpose, focus on it daily, quite honestly.
That's excellent advice. I'm just going to go move things to a different place.
Sure.
And we do this every once in a while. I think it'll be a fun thing to do. It's a lightning round. Okay,
Oh,
you ready for a lightning round? So I'm going to say two different.
By lightning, am I?
No.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
going to say two different things, and you got to pick one.
Okay.
All right, ready?
Yep.
Lightning round, just whatever comes to your head. All right. Rolling Stones or the Beatles?
Beatles.
Yankees or the Red Sox?
Yankees.
All right. Guitar or piano?
Guitar.
Okay. If you're at the movies, are you getting candy or popcorn?
Popcorn.
Okay. Name one seven dwarf.
Sleepy.
Well, you need the 7 hours, right? What's your favorite movie?
Star Wars.
Okay. Favorite band?
Oh God, see, I knew that was going to come in. Pearl Jam?
Pearl Jam. Okay. Beer or wine?
Beer.
I was going to say that. If you went up
Bo-
to 300, if you went up to
Body's
330
built for
pounds.
body's built for comfort, not for speed, Mark. I mean, runners, endurance athletes drink wine. Guys like me, we're all about the craft beer.
Okay. Last one. Netflix, Prime, or Hulu?
Netflix.
Okay. You passed the test. You passed the lightning round.
Woo!
Ta-da!
Love it. I love it.
Bravo.
Those were
Uh,
easy. But the Stones Beatles one,
that's tough. That's
that
a
is
tough one.
tough. I mean, but
Yeah.
you got to think of everything that the Beatles were and everything that they still are today. And I had a chance to meet Paul McCartney, who was, and Ringo, but Paul was unbelievably like one of the nicest people ever. I get goosebumps actually even just thinking about it, which you probably can't see here. Just unbelievable human being, very down to earth. I mean, the man is a living legend, a god as far as I'm concerned, right? As a musician, and to get a chance to meet him, I was worried because you always hear the "don't meet your idols," right? I'm like, oh God, oh God, oh God. And I was with my father, who's a huge Beatles fan. I'm like, oh God, this is going to go horribly. And my dad and I are going to have this horrible memory. And he couldn't have been any nicer. It was like we were
What
in
was
the
the stage? Where'd you meet him? How'd
it was
you?
backstage. It was backstage, Madison Square Garden. It was the Who. We were on the actually. I have the pass here. It was the Quadrophenia reunion
Oh,
tour.
yeah.
In '96, I want to say, somewhere in there, and it was just one of those like the who's who, pun intended, I guess, backstage of everybody that was there that wanted to see them, and we knew being in New York it was going to be everybody, like Clapton came out and a bunch of other folks, and just I'll never forget my just getting like my arm kind of clawed and turning and looking and was like, whoa, what's happening here? Oh my, it was almost like the sea of people had parted and there just stood Paul McCartney. I was like, this is my shot. Not to quote Hamilton, this was way before Hamilton, but I'm like, all right, this is my opportunity to meet this gentleman. And I ended up meeting him a couple times after that, which was amazing, but went up and I said, being in this business, I often don't get starstruck, but I had to come over, introduce myself. I had to introduce, we're huge fans, blah, blah, blah. And he just went right into where are you from? Oh, that's great. And my dad went on to something about some random time he tried to go and see them or whatever. And then they started making a connection. And then he wanted to know more about me and what I was doing and who I was with. And it was, felt like we talked for an hour. It was probably 2 minutes, but it was a very gracious conversation. And think about being humble and having all the energy and the things we were talking about. I mean, clearly Paul must practice these things. I don't know personally. I wish I could coach him directly. So Paul, if you're watching this, you happen to see it, let's rekindle that connection. But
I'm sure Paul's watching. He loves,
I'm sure he is.
He loves Coffee with Krav. He says it all the time.
Big thing. When this gets on Netflix, he's going to be all over it. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm going to ask you one last question.
Got it.
Is there a question that you wish I asked, or anything that you want to end with?
It's tough. I mean, we covered so much ground between music and leadership and energy. We talked a lot about what folks listening to this can do to help themselves. And I think that's the biggest thing for me. Personally, we connected obviously through my day job at Invesco, where I coach executives and coach advisors and their teams, but I work in other industries and other parallels as well, and written books and those sorts of things. So my big thing is just, getting folks to help, or getting to help folks is a big thing. So, I have a little side project for thinking in the music world called Quick Switching. And we have some, files out on SoundCloud where we're trying to bridge music and energy and stress and a lot of the topics we talk about. So that's always a fun thing for me. But no, I mean, look, I think we've covered quite a bit of ground this morning. I appreciate the opportunity here to share a cup of coffee with you. My cup is almost empty, so we are definitely at the end of our conversation, right? Hopefully the line at the Starbucks in my kitchen isn't super children all awake. But no, look, like I said, I appreciate the opportunity. I hope everybody listening and watching, picked up one or two things they can do to help themselves in a stress or anxiety or energy perspective today. And I look forward to maybe coming back on later on and chatting through some more of the musical side of things. Would be a lot of fun. Maybe.
Jay Therrien, you've said it all. I want to thank you so much. I appreciate the time that you've taken this morning. I think that a lot of people learned a lot of things here today. So thank you so much. My gratitude is to you. I'm grateful for you coming on today. And everybody out there, thank you so much once again for tuning into Coffee with Krav. We will be back, same bat time, same bat channel. At 10 o'clock next Tuesday. Thanks. See you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.